Welcome back to my YouTube channel. At 4 a.m., the world feels different. Too quiet, too vulnerable, too honest. That's exactly when the pain struck me like lightning. I woke to the sharp sting of metal-piercing skin, my stepbrother standing over me, a screwdriver in his hand, his breath shaky with a thrill I couldn't understand. I felt the warmth of blood sliding down my arm, but what scared me more was the sickening sound of laughter from the hallway, my parents. Laughing, not running toward me. Not helping me, just laughing. "You're so dramatic," my stepmother chuckled, as though the scene was a prank, as though my pain was entertainment. My father smirked like I was an inconvenience he wished away. I remember thinking, not about my wound, not about the screwdriver still embedded in my shoulder, but about how loneliness can feel deeper than pain. My hands trembled violently as I fumbled for my phone. The room spun, shadows twisting at the edges of my vision. I whispered one word into the emergency shortcut I'd set up months earlier. SOS. Sent. Delivered. Then everything dissolved into darkness. I woke up to beeping machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic. But what truly jolted me awake wasn't the hospital. It was the officer sitting beside me, leaning forward with a grim expression. "We got your message," he said. "And it saved your life." In the hours that followed, the world I knew cracked open. My SOS had triggered a welfare alert. The paramedics arrived to find my stepbrother still holding the screwdriver, my parents inventing lies faster than they could breathe. But the lies didn't stand long. The officers took photos, statements, evidence. And for once, someone believed me. When the case went to court, the tension felt electric. My stepmother wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father looked like he'd been dragged through his own storm. My stepbrother sat expressionless, like he didn't even grasp the weight of what he'd done. Then came the moment I spoke. My voice shook at first, then steadied. I told them about years of minimizing, gaslighting, the quiet cruelty disguised as rules, the emotional bruises no one noticed. My lawyer presented the messages, the recordings, the photos from that night. You could hear a pin drop. When the judge finally looked up, her face said everything before her words even arrived. It wasn't anger, it was sorrow. And resolve. "Your courage," she said slowly, "is the only reason you are alive today. And it is the reason justice will be served." The gavel struck. The courtroom exhaled, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. Walking out of that room, I realized something powerful. Survivors are not defined by what was done to us, but by what we choose to rise into. I didn't leave that courthouse as a victim. I left as a woman who refused to stay silent, a woman who reclaimed her voice, a woman who understood her worth. And maybe, just maybe, someone reading this will gather strength from my story and whisper the same message to themselves. You deserve safety. You deserve truth. You deserve to walk away and rise. At 4 a.m., the world doesn't wake gently. It rips you out of sleep, exposes every shadow, every sound, every thought you've tried to swallow. That's why I still remember the exact texture of the darkness when I opened my eyes and felt something sharp dig into my shoulder. It wasn't confusion that hit me first. It was shock so intense it turned my breath into a frozen stone in my chest. My stepbrother's outline hovered above me, the metal glint on the screwdriver catching the faint light sneaking through my curtains. His face, blank, disturbingly calm, as if hurting me was nothing more than a chore he'd been assigned. The pain radiated in hot waves, a throbbing fire beneath my skin, rushing so fast I couldn't even process the scream stuck in my throat. The warmth of my own blood seeped through my shirt, crawling down my arm in a slow, mocking trail. I felt betrayed by my body, too weak to fight back, too stunned to move. But what came next cut deeper than the screwdriver itself. Laughter, not his, theirs. My parents' laughter drifting down the hallway like a twisted soundtrack to my nightmare. "You're so dramatic," my stepmother said, her voice laced with irritation, not concern. My father muttered something under his breath, something dismissive, something cruel, something painfully familiar. That was always the pattern in our home. I reacted, they minimized. I hurt, they mocked. I cried, they rolled their eyes, but this time was different. The pain was too real, the blood too warm, the danger too undeniable. For a second, I wondered if they truly didn't care, or if they had simply abandoned the idea of ever caring about me a long time ago. Maybe they were too tired of my existence, or maybe they were too invested in keeping the family image polished to bother seeing the daughter bleeding in front of them. My hands shook uncontrollably as I tried to push myself up. I didn't make it far. My vision wobbled, spots forming like ink stains. The room tilted and twisted, my breath turning shallow. I remember thinking that if I passed out now, I might never wake up. And the terrifying part? No one in that house would even flinch. My phone was on the nightstand, inches away, a lifeline disguised in a cracked screen. I stretched my fingers toward it, each movement sending a jolt down my arm. When I finally managed to pull it into my hand, the screen lit up too brightly, blurring my vision further. But instinct, pure survival instinct, guided me. I hit the emergency shortcut. The one I'd set up quietly, secretly. I whispered a single word, barely audible through the tremor in my lips. SOS, sent, delivered, and as the darkness pulled me under, I held on to one fragile hope, that someone out there would care enough to come. When consciousness slowly tugged me back, it felt like rising through thick water. Every sound was muffled, every breath a struggle, and for a moment I didn't know if I was alive or drifting in some painful limbo. The sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic hit me first. Then the soft beeping of a machine somewhere near my head. My eyelids felt heavy, glued shut, but the world around me was no longer dark. There was light, warm and steady, pressing against my skin. I forced my eyes open, and the blurry outline of a ceiling swam into view. It took a moment before shapes sharpened, and I realized I was lying in a hospital bed. A thin blanket covered me, my shoulder wrapped in layers of white gauze stained faintly with dried blood. The hum of fluorescent lights made the air feel oddly still, as though the entire world was holding its breath. Then I saw him. A police officer sat in a chair beside me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, watching me with an expression caught somewhere between concern and relief. When he noticed my eyes open, he straightened immediately. "You're awake," he said gently, but his tone carried weight, like he'd been afraid I wouldn't wake at all. I tried to speak, but my throat burned, and only a rasp came out. He reached for a cup of water, helped me guide the straw to my lips. The first sip was cold enough to make my chest tighten, but it pushed life back into my body. "You sent an SOS," he continued, voice low, deliberate. "A welfare alert went out. We traced it and arrived at your house within minutes. That message, it saved your life." His words felt unreal, like they were floating in front of me, waiting for my mind to catch up. I tried to remember what happened after I pressed the emergency shortcut, but everything was foggy, just scattered pieces of pain, darkness, and distant voices. He must have seen the confusion in my face because he took a slow breath before speaking again. "When we got there," he said, "your stepbrother was still in your room. The screwdriver was found near you. Your parents—" He paused, jaw tightening. "They told us you were making it up. That it was some kind of stunt. Of course they did. That was their default setting. Twist the truth until it bent into something convenient for them. But this time, the world didn't bend with them. We saw the wound," he went on. "We saw the blood, the state of the room. Their story didn't align with anything. Medical responders knew immediately you needed urgent care. You were barely conscious when they carried you out." My chest tightened at the image. Me, limp and bleeding, while the people meant to protect me watched without lifting a hand. But the officer's presence, his calmness, kept me grounded. For once, there was someone who wasn't trying to convince me I was dramatic, overreacting, or imagining things. Someone who believed what happened because the truth was undeniable. He sighed softly as if weighing his next words. "There's going to be an investigation. Your statement will matter. What you say will matter." He paused. "You're not alone in this anymore. Not alone." 2 words I hadn't felt in years. I rested my head back against the pillow, the weight of everything pressing down but somehow lifting at the same time. My body was weak, but inside, something small and fragile flickered. A spark I thought my home had crushed out of me long ago. Someone had heard my call. Someone had come. And for the first time in a long, terrifying night, I felt the faintest whisper of safety. In the hours that followed, the world I thought I knew began to peel apart, layer by layer, revealing truths I had sensed for years but had never been able to prove. The officers moved with quiet purpose around my hospital room, asking questions gently at first, then with sharper edges as details surfaced. They weren't just gathering facts, they were connecting dots, mapping patterns, seeing what I had always been told not to see. My voice wavered when I answered, each memory like reopening a bruise. But the officers listened, really listened, in a way no one in my home ever had. Every time I paused, expecting to be cut off, dismissed or mocked, they simply waited. Patient, steady, encouraging. It felt strange, almost unreal, to speak and not be punished for it. By the next morning, the investigation had already widened. Social workers, detectives, medical staff, they moved like pieces of a puzzle aligning around me. They asked about incidents I had buried so deep I didn't even know if they counted as abuse. The gaslighting, the isolation, the sudden shifts between cold indifference and explosive anger, the way my stepmother always framed me as the unstable one, the dramatic one, the problem. How my father stood behind her, nodding like a shadow she controlled. They found old messages on my phone, texts where I begged to be believed, notes to myself documenting things I was afraid I'd forget, recordings of arguments where my voice trembled and theirs remained icy and calculated. I had kept them without knowing why. Maybe a part of me always hoped someone someday would look and say, "Yes, this happened. You're not imagining it." Now that moment had finally arrived. One of the detectives, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that carried both strength and softness, sat beside me at one point. She told me gently, "People like your parents, they're good at staying hidden. They know how to twist narratives. They know how to look normal in public. But they leave cracks behind. And we're trained to see them." Her words wrapped around me like a blanket I didn't know I needed. As they spoke to neighbors, teachers, old acquaintances, pieces of my life rose to the surface. Bits of concern others had brushed aside. Comments about how quiet I had become, how isolated, how withdrawn. Small things I never realized people noticed. The truth wasn't coming together because of one moment. It was coming together because of years of moments I had been forced to swallow in silence. When they questioned my parents, the facade began to crumble. Their polished confidence slipped. Their stories didn't match. Their timelines contradicted each other. The more they talked, the deeper they sank. And my stepbrother, who once looked untouchable behind their protection, finally stood exposed. What shocked everyone most was how quickly the carefully built image of a respectable family unraveled. The officers told me their behavior at the house alarmed them instantly. No panic, no urgency, no remorse. Just irritation that the police had shown up at all. They weren't concerned about me. They were concerned about being inconvenienced. And that, more than anything, revealed the truth. For the first time, the reality I'd always carried alone was being held up to the light by people who weren't afraid to see it. The system that had failed me so often before was suddenly aligning in my favor, not because my pain had changed, but because the evidence could no longer be ignored. Each revelation strengthened something inside me, something I'd forgotten existed, a sense of clarity, of validation, of long-silenced truth finding its voice. The story of what happened that night wasn't just mine anymore. And for the first time, that felt like salvation. When the case finally moved toward trial, the atmosphere around me shifted in a way I could physically feel, like the air grew thicker, charged with everything unsaid, everything waiting to erupt. My hospital room became a temporary command center of sorts. Lawyers came and went, detectives reviewed evidence with stern expressions, and social workers checked in on me with quiet compassion. Every person who stepped through the door seemed to understand that this wasn't just a case. It was years of silence breaking open. I remember the morning they first told me I would need to testify. My stomach knotted instantly. Even though I had survived the attack, the idea of facing the people who raised me, people who perfected the art of turning my truth into a punchline, made my bones shake. What if they glared at me like they always did? What if their lies sounded more convincing than my reality? What if the courtroom saw me through the lens my parents had designed? Dramatic, unstable, overly emotional. But my lawyer looked me straight in the eyes, steady and unflinching. "You don't need to perform," she said. "You just need to tell the truth. Let the evidence speak with you." Those words stuck with me. They didn't ask me to be strong, just honest. And honesty, after everything, was the one thing I still had. When I stepped into the courtroom days later, I felt like I had walked into a storm. The ceiling was high, the lights too bright, the room filled with a kind of formal silence that pressed hard against my chest. Rows of faces blurred together, strangers holding their breath as if the air was laced with tension. My parents sat on the opposite side, postured with the same self-righteous confidence I'd seen all my life. My stepmother had that familiar tight-lipped smile, the one she used when she believed she'd already won. My father's expression was cold, calculating, scanning the room as if deciding who his next audience would be. My stepbrother avoided everyone's gaze, shoulders drawn in, but there was no remorse in his posture, only the arrogance of someone who had never faced consequences before. When I took the stand, my legs were trembling so hard I had to grip the railing, but when I opened my mouth and the first sentence left my lips, something shifted inside me. It was like the words had been waiting for release, building up pressure for years. I spoke about the night of the attack, about waking to pain, about the laughter that followed. I spoke about the years of emotional neglect, the gaslighting, the subtle violence that never left physical scars but bruised my spirit in ways no one saw. Every detail I shared echoed in the room, and I could feel the weight of each one settling onto the shoulders of the people listening. The prosecutor presented the messages I had saved, the text threads where I begged for kindness, the notes documenting arguments, the voice recordings where my stepmother's cruelty dripped like poison. Each piece of evidence felt like a crack splitting the polished mask my parents had worn for so long. I watched their expressions change as the truth piled higher. My stepmother's smile faded into stiffness. My father's confidence began to drain, his jaw tightening with every contradiction exposed. And my stepbrother, who once felt untouchable, sat frozen, his facade slowly collapsing. At one point, I risked a glance at the jury. Their faces were still, almost stunned, absorbing every word, every image, every contradiction. No one shuffled. No one whispered. The courtroom felt suspended, like the air was waiting for the truth to settle in fully. And then, when the last recording played, a clip where my stepmother mocked me for crying after she humiliated me in front of relatives, the silence in the room deepened. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of silence that happens when people finally see what they had never imagined before. By the time I stepped down from the stand, something inside me felt lighter. Not healed, not whole, but untangled. For the first time, my story wasn't being twisted. It wasn't being denied. It wasn't being laughed at. It was being heard, and that alone changed everything. What happened next felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the final truth to land. The courtroom had already shifted, its energy heavier, its silence sharper, but the final stretch of the trial peeled away the last layers of the lies my family had built their reputation on. Expert witnesses came forward one after another. The medical examiner testified about the angle of the wound, the force behind it, and how impossible it was for the injury to be self-inflicted. A trauma specialist spoke about the emotional patterns I described, how they aligned with long-term psychological abuse. Even the EMT who carried me out on a stretcher recalled my fading pulse, my blood-soaked shirt, and my stepmother complaining about the commotion instead of asking whether I would survive. Every testimony felt like a stone placed carefully on the scales of justice. But what struck the room hardest was the evidence the detectives uncovered from our home. Photos of the disorder in my room, the blood on the sheets, the screwdriver still lying where it fell. The inconsistencies in my parents' statements. The neighbors' accounts of hearing shouting for years and never seeing my parents intervene. One neighbor recalled a night she almost called the police but didn't, something that made her cry on the stand, guilt trembling through every word. My parents tried to salvage their image. They took the stand with the same arrogance they'd always carried, speaking as if they were the victims of an exaggerated story. They insisted I was emotional, unstable, prone to acting out. They painted themselves as patient guardians who had tried their best with a difficult child. My stepmother even forced tears, perfectly timed, perfectly false. But this time, their performance fell flat. The prosecutor dismantled every lie with calm precision. Every misremembered detail was matched with a message, a recording, a timeline they couldn't rewrite. Every attempt to redirect blame fell apart under scrutiny. And by the time my stepbrother testified, stumbling over his own words, contradicting their version and his own, their house of cards finally collapsed. You could see it happen in real time. The jury leaning forward. The judge's expression tightening with each revelation. The audience shifting, murmuring, absorbing the unraveling truth. And then came the moment no one expected. The judge called for a brief recess. When she returned, her face held a gravity that made the room go impossibly still. She looked at me first, directly, steadily, in a way that conveyed something I had been waiting to feel my entire life. Validation. Then she looked at my parents and stepbrother. Her voice was controlled, but there was an unmistakable edge of disbelief, disgust even, as she addressed them. She spoke of negligence, cruelty, deception. She spoke of the overwhelming evidence. She spoke of the danger I had been placed in, not just that night, but repeatedly, consistently, over years. And she spoke of the remarkable fact that I had survived long enough to reach the courtroom at all. No one exhaled. No one moved. Even the walls seemed to listen, and when she delivered her ruling, her tone carried finality, justice, and something else, something almost protective. Something that told the world, and me, that what I had endured was real, undeserved, and unforgivable. The courtroom remained silent long after her words faded, silent in disbelief. Silent in empathy, silent because the truth was louder than anything my family had ever tried to bury. And in that heavy, breathtaking silence, I felt something shift inside me, a door closing on everything that had broken me, and another opening toward everything I could finally become. When the gavel finally struck for the last time, it felt like the sound echoed straight through my chest, not as a reminder of everything I had endured, but as a declaration that the cycle had been broken. The officers escorted my parents and stepbrother out of the courtroom, their faces stripped of the power they once wielded over me. For the first time, they looked small, shrinking into the consequences they had always believed they were immune to. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't need to. Instead, I focused on the air around me, the way it suddenly felt lighter, easier to breathe, as though the world was finally shifting into alignment with the truth I had carried alone for far too long. My lawyer touched my shoulder gently, the one that had once been a wound and was now a scar healing beneath clean bandages. "You did it," she whispered. "Not we. Not the case. You." And for the first time, I believed it. Walking out of the courthouse, sunlight spilled across the steps like a promise I hadn't known how to imagine before. The warmth felt different, not like blood rushing down my arm, not like fear tightening my skin, but like life soaking in, like hope finding space, like beginning. I realized then that survival wasn't just about escaping pain. It was about reclaiming the parts of myself my family had tried to silence. My voice, my worth, my future. I wasn't just stepping into a new chapter. I was stepping into a life I finally had the power to choose. I wasn't dramatic. I wasn't unstable. I wasn't the problem. I was a girl who lived, a woman who rose, a survivor who spoke the truth until the world could no longer look away. And as the doors closed behind me, I felt the final peace settle softly inside my chest. The story didn't end in that courtroom. It began there,